And for those, oh, and we have recording in progress. My name's John Cunningham, and I'm the FEA's Chief Executive. And pleased to welcome you all for joining us this afternoon to talk about this industry outlook. I'm delighted to be joined by Kateline Porritt. Kateline from Egg Soldiers. I'm going to talk in a few minutes' time a bit about who Egg Soldiers are, what they do. Kateline has a wonderful job title, Head of Trends, someone who's super trendy, sat alongside me virtually. So we're going to talk a bit about Egg Soldiers, about that Head of Trends role, about what we see coming up in 2024 and beyond. Isn't it a scary thought? We're a little over a month away, and we've got Christmas beckoning. But I know a lot of businesses are at this stage going through business planning for 2024, forecasting, the accounts and financing for next year. So hopefully this is quite timely to be thinking about how does things look for the industry, given there's an awful lot of turbulence out there. Before I introduce Kateline properly, that's my welcome really to all of you. That's the program we've got for the next 45 to 60 minutes. I think we're a little bit fluid this afternoon. We'll talk about the industry outlook. We'll talk about the operator market, which of course influences our behavior. And then we will look into what are the opportunities arising from that for equipment suppliers. Throughout this session with Egg Soldiers, Kateline and I have agreed, if you've got some questions, feel free to come off mute or pop something in the chat box, and it'd be nice to have some interactivity. And then a little bit later this afternoon, I'm going to share an update on the FEA's Industry Insights platform that we've got. Just in case you're not aware of it, I've got a couple of slides about that and some of the headlines that's currently showing as well. And finally, we'll hear from Andy on product group forums. Just a short shout out for some of the product group forums that FEA has got in case you're not aware of them. And I'll close then with some things that are coming up and exciting from FEA. So I'm hoping that sounds like a really good afternoon. But without further ado, let me stop the talking and let me welcome Kateline. I'm absolutely delighted you've been able to join us this afternoon. From Egg Soldiers, tell us a little bit, if you will, about Egg Soldiers and this wonderful role you've got as Head of Trends.
Thank you. Very lovely to be here and with you all this afternoon. Yes, Egg Soldiers, funny name, but nice and memorable, people always tell us. We're essentially a group of chefs, operations and industry experts. We've all been in the industry for a long time and clubbed together to support businesses, lend our expertise to any point in the process of their product development, starting up a business, maintaining their business, improving their offer, or optimizing their running efficiencies. So we do a little bit of everything, and we've got enough expertise in the team to come in at any stage. So we work with operators in hospitality and food service, as well as retail and manufacturing supply. And individually, we work a lot with equipment suppliers as well, lots of crockery, smallwares, and everything in between. So we have lots of fingers in lots of pies, as it were. And as you said, I'm the Head of Trends. I think even Head of Trends and Insights, but we don't say that because it's too long. And I have a wonderful job. I get to spend my days looking at the food industry and understanding what's happening, what's changing, and working with my team to then share that with our clients and with the wider food industry. And that can be anything from talking about massive global macro shifts, which we'll talk about in a minute, all the way through to very specific mouth-numbing spice mixes that we found in rural China that we think would interest a specific menu and consumer that we're talking about. So really nice wide range of impact of what's happening in the food and beverage landscape.
Thanks, Kateline. Well, look, you've whet my appetite there and made a lovely segue straight into what are those big macro trends then that you, and it's worth reiterating, this team that you've got around you at Egg Soldiers, looking at all parts of the operator and the indeed the hospitality market. But where do you see things going?
Good question. And for everyone else on the webinar at the moment, John sent me a lovely list of terrible things happening in the world at the moment, which to set the scene for our conversation. And it feels like that, and it sort of feels like that as us as individuals as well as industry, and we look at industry as the marker for what's happening and how that's going to impact individual consumers. I always say asking a consumer what they want or what they're experiencing is not so accurate as seeing what industry is doing, and tend to follow the money, because that probably gives us the best predictions that we can. There's 4 macro trends. I'll just give a tiny intro in that we talk about a lot, and I use a lot in my reports and when I'm working with clients. And the first is we always look at the economy, because we get the big predictions there. We get lots of big data sets there, so we can feel more assured of what's happening in the economy, both globally and for the UK. And what we call our economic outlook for the next couple of years is value redefinition. And there will be a big push, both at industry and consumer level, of what value looks like. And that splits us between how cheap can we be, how big can our profits be to survive, but also how can we make things seem more worth it. And at an operator level, that's quite often about adding those extra touches, that extra level of experience, so the consumer feels like it is worth spending those pennies and pounds that they have. So lots of redefinition around what our expectation of value is. When it comes to technology, and I know we'll talk about more of this coming up, we're talking about bionic integration, and really that is the complete blending of technology with our living lifestyles. It's felt like we've been doing that for a few years now, but certainly a lot of the tech that we're seeing, of course, AI we'll talk about, but wearable technology, integrated technology, health technology that is very personal to us, how our individual bodies and DNA and genes work. More of that in the next couple of years of how it fully integrates with our lifestyles. Environment, another fun one. We're talking about impact and adaptation. So how we are impacting the environment and having to adapt, and how the environment is impacting us, and we are having to adapt to it, will continue to happen, of course, over the next few years and longer term into the future. And it is all about our agility and flexibility in able to respond to it. And finally, people. We look at social, we look at society and what's happening with the behaviours of people and the big shifts that we do as a group, and how we impact business and industry. And the title that we've gone for the next couple of years is Works for Me. And part of that is a nod to the huge labour considerations that we know our operators, retailers and manufacturers, all our clients, are very much impacted by, but also the leaning that we have of not just the younger generations, but many different generations, thinking about actually, how does this work for me? Does it work for me? Does it benefit me? And the expectations that we have, even in amongst sort of times of various crises and challenge, we still want things to be personalised and to impact us in as positive a way as possible. And I set all those things up because we don't shy away from talking about the challenges. We don't think that that's very helpful. But we also know that in times of crisis and times of challenges where we see the most innovation, and that's where we see businesses really turning around and really succeeding in perhaps an unprecedented or unpredictable way. And we use that in order to predict what can be happening in the future.
So lots going on. That's my takeaway. A few of those I saw: environment and people. For those of you that were at the FEA conference last week, we talked quite a lot about environment, about sustainability. I think we'll come back to that, Kate, in a bit. And certainly people. I guess last week we were coming from the angle of recruitment, retention, training, looking after your people. Maybe that's tied in with all of this. I didn't see wearable tech coming. So I'm scribbling some bits down here. We're in tough economic times. I was speaking to an accountant at one of our big manufacturers recently, who's going through that business planning process right now for next year. And as you say, there are some seismic things happening, whether it be war in Ukraine, whether it be what's going on in Gaza, whether it be some of the energy costs, cost of living prices, what's happening in hospitality land, challenges with getting people in the right place. Who would be a futurologist really with all of this turbulence going on? But nevertheless, elections looming in the UK, USA, hopefully some thawing we're seeing of the UK-China relationship, but all of these seismic things that are going on that affect confidence in manufacturer land. Given all of that, can you give us some insight on how, particularly about the operator viewpoint, how are they thinking about growth over the next 3 years? Or are they thinking just batten down the hatches and try to survive? What's their mode?
I'm gonna jump ahead to something I was going to talk about later, but I think we're in a position of no one's planning to make the loss, no one's planning to shut down. So everyone is in that survival and thriving mode. We will see losses and we'll see successes over the next couple of years, for sure, because it is, as you said, such a tumultuous space. As I said before, that will yield us a hell of a lot of innovation. We will see some incredible, some bold, and some really risky ideas and innovation coming through in the next couple of years. And it's why the technology space is so interesting to see what will be adopted, and what will end up working. And people will begin to look at technology as a solution. So whether it be a solution for labour challenges, efficiencies, both back and front of house in marketing. We already know user-generated content is such a huge push for marketing and can be so much more affordable than traditional styles of PR and media. So we'll definitely see that. What we'll probably see the most of is successes in those big chains, because we know they're expanding. We know they still have big expansion plans, and that's part of their survival process, is to get into as many places as possible and diversify as much as possible. But also what we'll see is these grassroots movements. And that's what I'm sort of more excited about. The chains will sort of look after themselves, but it's the startups, it's the grassroots movements that I think will be the most interesting in the next couple of years, and certainly where equipment suppliers can support really heavily, because there'll be a lot of people coming into the industry through choice or by force of limited options. And we're going to get some really interesting ideas coming from those people, and they will need a lot of support from industry experts and specialists such as your membership base.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit more then about these grassroots, as you call them, that are coming in. Just help us understand who are they? What sort of operators are they? What sort of scale? What are their motivations? And what are the opportunities you see alongside these newbies coming in?
I'd say part of the small ones are, well, I always, hark back to previous times. We do a piece of work called trend cycling. So we've looked back at different times where the economy has been in similar challenges, or we face similar environmental news, and the predictability of then what happens in the coming years after that. So if we take 2008, 2009 and what happened after that, that's when we saw it, and we saw the COVID pivot, I call it, of people having to adapt and pushing themselves into new spaces. And what you get is people having lost their jobs, unfortunately, people moving out of the cities into more rural areas, people migrating internationally and having to set up and establish new workspaces, new business ideas, and lots of people go into food because of that, because it's a skill set that they might have, it's a passion that they're interested in, or it's something that they feel they can bring something new to that new rural area, that new country, that new space. So it's a place where lots of people try, and it's a lot of places where people fail. And as I said, it's a place where lots of people need support. So it's things like pop-ups, supper clubs, residencies. You have a lot of bricks and mortar property owners on the high street at the moment who are having to say goodbye to their current renters and leaseholders because they're moving, they're changing, they've not survived. But you'll get people moving in who want to try and who have a little bit of investment or a little bit of chutzpah to come and try their product. So, and utilizing all the technology platforms that we have, the delivery platforms, the likes of the dark kitchens. So how can people make that hospitality space affordable for the consumer, but also affordable to run? So that's the kind of grassroots movements we're talking about. It's individuals, it's very small operators being able to get into those niche spaces and both virtually and physically small spaces in order to deliver something for the consumer and get a profitable business off the ground.
Gotcha. So really interesting times coming up then from those and very different times it feels like coming up as well. Kateline, you kindly sent me a few slides and they're very colourful. They're beautiful. Do you want me to have a look at them just yet, or should we hold on?
You can go on to the first one if you want to. We can talk a bit more about operator growth. So one of the big things with operator growth is broadening occasions. So we're talking about new day parts. We're all those established chains that we're talking about, all those big brands that are still expanding and wanting to get out and reach the customer. The customer is not so much traveling to them as a destination anymore. So being able to offer what the customer needs at the place the customer is incredibly important. So diversifying revenue streams is really important to those bigger businesses, those bigger chains. And that's things like the likes of new day parts. Again, I'll talk back to the early 2010s and the rise of brunch. And trying to really tap into that market. And that came at a great crossroads of hospitality and operators wanting to get someone in and spending more money at times of days when they weren't having a lot of custom. And what we're slightly seeing now is a really interesting sort of mini trend in the aperitivo time. So how do you get people out at that pre-dinner for sort of drinks and snacks, spending a little bit more money? In the likes of pubs doing breakfast, we're open anyway. How do we get people to part with their cash a little bit more? And certainly the entertainment sector. So fun places like clubs and wine bars offering more food to, again, increase that bill size. But also from a customer perspective, going out for dinner, I also want some entertainment and some experience. The picture we have here is of Moto, which is a really fantastic example of where a lot of big brands' expansion plans are going, which is transport hubs. So we've seen big investment in train stations and service stations over the last couple of years. And what's really nice, and what I was going to say about brunch, is the other reason that was so successful was, of course, the advent of Instagram and everything became pictures. So we always look out for a couple of reasons that a trend might take off. Transport hubs is a great one to look at, and why these big brands are investing in expanding into them, because it's that captured audience we talked about. So we can't rely on our customers coming to us, so let's go to the customers. People are still having to travel about, possibly even travel more if we're talking about staycations, or we're talking about people have moved into places outside cities but still having to go into the cities for jobs and various services and amenities. What Moto have done is really harness that and tied it in with the rise of EV. So electrical vehicles, where I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time on the service station. I'm going up the motorway. I'm going to spend that half an hour, that 45 minutes to fuel the car. What can I do? So what's the experience I can have at Moto? Is it more of a sit down eating occasion? Is it more of a pleasurable experience than kind of your classic service station offer? And they're doing a lot of interesting stuff. But again, we talk about footprint, we talk about what kind of equipment can we get in there to diversify the offer, to offer something than a cold, soggy sandwich.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's isn't that a great example, actually, Moto? The old days of service stations were somewhere you wanted to get away from, and now making themselves almost a destination, or certainly part of the journey, and that using that opportunity that comes with EVs. Caitlin, you touched on there. I suppose everyone on this call is going to be really interested in, so where are the opportunities for equipment manufacturers and distributors in all of that? And I think a lot of it you've hinted to, but I wonder if we could explore that a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things here in here that in terms of equipment solutions. And one, you have the likes of, say, a Pret, and their model is based on city centres, but where they're diversifying and where they're trying to add new revenue streams, the likes of going to transport hubs, their setup, their infrastructure actually is changing. So talking to and relying upon the equipment suppliers and their advice and wisdom, as well as the physical equipment solutions that can be offered, can certainly be incredibly handy. When people are diversifying in terms of the day parts, they might not have the equipment back of house that, you know, is suitable for breakfast, that's suitable for that aperitivo time, that's suitable for that morning coffee. So having those solutions on hand into an industry, even well-established brands are much less familiar with. So there's a lot of support there. If you go on to the next slide, it's a slightly sort of crude image of this spring onion chopper. And I pulled it out because the restaurant in America, Momofuku, were talking about it on their Instagram literally this week, and raving about how this saves them so much time, so much energy, and it just slices up spring onions. It's a simple kind of chopper solution, but it's a really interesting one to have restaurants at a certain level and any level talking about how they are increasing their consistency and their speed and efficiencies back of house. And again, we'll constantly come back to it, but that's them allowing them to be more careful about their labor. So that's rather than having someone to finely slice onions for an hour, it's a much quicker job. And if you have a varying skilled labor force, which we know is happening more, and if it's more likely that you're short-staffed or you have more untrained labor back of house, it's things like that piece of equipment that actually is going to make a massive amount of difference and drive your consistency of product.
So it's a lot about both consistency of product, consistency of service, but also the fact we're struggling with labor across the sector.
Yeah.
So you're touching on there. I wanted to have a chat about technology. We're hearing about the rise of AI and all things digital, the connected kitchen. How do you see this revolution arriving? How do you see operator behavior changing? And what are the requirements and opportunities, I guess, on equipment manufacturers and distributors to support that?
My least favorite question. No, I like it. AI is a really interesting one. I think we're always going to have a balance, especially when we're up against labor challenges. We always want to support our teams. And as you said, despite wearing technology right now, John, you feel like we're not seeing as much wearable tech, and it is because it's being adopted so sporadically across different industries and down to individuals within businesses as well. So we will AI is something that we're keeping a really close eye on, and I think there's some really practical applications for it in terms of labor management. So the types of software that teams and managers are using to understand how best placed teams should be, and how we can manage that on those sort of short-staffed and smaller team circumstances. In terms of, I think, the idea of robotics and robotic chefs is a slightly different world. But again, it ties a little bit into our pop-up idea. So when I talk about the small footprint, the pop-ups, the portability of those, I call them grassroots movements, actually that's where technology could be adopted much quicker, and bringing in something for a short time that we know can just deliver and churn out. So on the next picture, you can see this is Aldi's Pigs in Blankets Christmas pop-up. And actually, you can imagine the likes of that are short term, bringing in something that is just going to churn out some high quality product for a short amount of time. It's a quick adoption. And I think we're going through that testing and trialing stage with everything digital and AI at the moment. So I can't say with full confidence how it will go cross industry. But I think there's definitely opportunity for it, and it will come. There's still a lot of skepticism across the industry and for consumers of the usage of AI. And we were talking earlier about the security risks as well. And you only have to look at social media at the moment to see what's happening with OpenAI and Microsoft, to see the turmoil all the way at the top. So it's one to watch, but it's one that we're keeping an eye on to see what's going to happen to help us in the future. But I think at the moment, the more likely thing to be adopted is the information. How do we get more information about what our customers are doing, where they are, and how our staff are, and how best to drive efficiencies in-house? I think will be the first things to be adopted before we go all out on robots.
I did see at the Hotel, Restaurant and Catering show earlier this year, HRC, they had these robots wandering the aisles, and these are these service robots that can, do the front of house, deliver your meal. So you've ordered something using the app, and along comes this robot and delivers it to you, or delivers a lovely tray to you. And I heard they were in use at Dublin Airport, although I confess I was at Dublin Airport about 2 weeks ago and I didn't see them. I was looking out for them. But like you say, they'll no doubt be early adopters for all this new really clever tech, and then there'll be stuff that is safer that we're ready to move into. Fantastic. You did mention amongst the 4 big macro trends that you covered, one of them you talked about was environment, and I'm interested in that partly quite selfishly. FEA launched last week our new sustainability training program, Foodservice Carbon Professional, to much acclaim at the FEA conference last week. I'm interested in environmental issues. We're on the brink of, I think it's about a week, 10 days time, COP28 kicks off. How do you see that influencing operator behavior, and maybe the market over the next 12 to 24 months?
So one thing that we tend to see with sustainability, and this is a more of a consumer level, is at these times of sort of economic financial uncertainty, is we tend to see a little bit of a step back. We see a little bit of a pullback on the priority being sustainability. And I always say that I call it our sphere of influence and impact. And as individuals, we've got a certain amount of money in our pocket, and our community gets a bit smaller. It's about getting ourselves, our families to the end of the day. We say it about health. It's no longer about living to 100 years old. It's how do I stay well for now? And within sustainability and our sort of global responsibility, again, it comes in a little bit closer to home. So we tend to see a little bit of a drop off in spend from consumers into the sustainability space. Now, versus, again, 10 years ago when we saw the big drop off from organic sales, we don't see that as much this time around. Various reasons. Obviously, we're in a completely sort of different world right now. But also because the climate impact, the environmental impacts that we are having on the world at the moment are so much more visible. And I think there's much more of an understanding from the customer base and from industry of how important it is to be doing things that are much more regenerative and much more sustainable. We also have a younger generation who were brought up with that messaging, and the likes of Generation Z and millennials been brought up much more with that messaging, and obviously are moving into the workforce, so they have the spending power now to be using that and using their pounds to support sustainability. So there will continue to be a lot of interest in businesses that align with environmental and sustainable values. And as such, we are in a position still, it's going to come and it's going to be necessary, whether it becomes for businesses a choice to become a bit more sustainable, or at some point in the future, by force, that they will have to make certain changes. So in order to be sustainable as a business, it's a prudent idea to start investing in those sustainable solutions. So having products that last longer, that don't have such a detrimental environmental impact, single plastic usage and carbon footprint and all of those things. The tricky thing, as always, is the people who are in command of that, the governments and big investment businesses, on which particular one that they are pushing at the moment. And as you said, we'll find out in a few weeks if we hear more about that and have more of a steer for industry of what they should be adopting into. But our view is it's going to happen, and there will be points of legislation in place to really drive home what we need to be doing when it comes to sustainability. So it's certainly a good idea to get ahead of that and investing in the likes of equipment and long-term solutions that are going to provide more sustainable business ideas.
Yeah, good stuff. And I think we probably applaud that that's moving in the right direction. No, interesting. We had Ellie Wrighton from Mitchells and Butlers a conference last week, and she talked about influencing actually the consumers' spending habit. I think the figure was something like 63% of consumers said they would be drawn to menu options that were more sustainable. So if we're starting to see, as you say, amongst particularly younger generation, are really starting to think about their spending habits and thinking that influences where I want to put my money and what I want to buy, that's going to have a knock-on and influence operator behavior, as in M&B. And I've got a note just in front of me here about Sodexo. I think it was about a month ago, they announced a net zero deadline for their supply chain. Where, look, if you're not working towards net zero and you can't prove it, Sodexo is saying, we don't want to work with you, being really blunt. So we're certainly seeing it filter into the equipment space and across hospitality as so important to us. Kateline, you also talked about, you've touched on labour supply being a challenge. I just wondered if, how do you see that labour supply panning out? We have Rishi Sunak's policy on small boats and migration, and it feels like in some senses we're still trying to pull the drawbridge up and isolate. We've had Brexit, God knows how many years ago now. How do you see us solving our labour supply issues across hospitality?
Well, again, I'd like to thank you for all the happy questions. If we go on to, I'll bring up the next slide to distract people from the depressing world of labour at the moment. Yeah, this the example I wanted to raise was Sweetgreens in America, who are attempting to automate their salad bar concept. So very much you order as you go in at the self-serve kiosk screens, and then you can watch your salad be compiled by the automated machinery behind. And they have high hopes for expanding that across their estate to simplify. They have thus far, I think, tried to avoid talking too much about the labour losses that they will face, still talking about having hosts and people there to help out. So a nice intertwine of where technology can come in and help us with some of the efficiencies that will be lost through both number of people in the labour force, but also, as we talked about, skill and training. I think there's a very I think that it's twofold with labour. As you said, there's lots of reasons where we just don't have enough labour at the moment available to us in the UK, and certainly what is considered affordable labour for businesses who are struggling to balance the books at the moment. And I think a lot of technology and a lot of equipment will come in and solve a lot of that for us. So it's having more automated machinery, which can be managed by a team, but delivering that high level of consistency, and as we iron out the problems with future technology, and get it really right so it's delivering something great for us. I think one of the big things that I want to talk about with labour, because the technology sits there, and that everyone listening will have, I'm sure, equipment in their portfolios that help both back of house and front of house. I think one of the big pushes that we'll also see with, again, slightly with our younger generation, is the expectations around labour as well, especially when we're talking about hospitality. And there's lots of talk about how the treatment of people in hospitality, and the expectations of younger and lots of our employed forces needing and expecting a higher quality and higher standard of work expectations, the consciousness around our mental health, as well as support and a great working culture. So it will be really interesting. I think there'll be a big push on automating half of the workload, and the rest of the half making sure that we're really looking after the staff that we do have, and treating them as respectfully and as they should be in a workforce to maintain their employment as well. So having it not such a high turnover industry, because actually the mentality of you're replaceable doesn't really exist now, because they're not, because there's not enough people going into the hospitality and food industry. So I think we'll see both. We'll see this the implication of equipment and technology, but also how do we look after our teams much better so that they stay with us.
Well, Kateline, that's quite a positive place to end on. I've given you some challenges as questions, but I quite like ending on the, do you know what, there's going to be a happy place where we get, yes, technology working to support it, but a happier cultures and more positive environments for our people to work in as well. I think that's a lovely place to draw this to a close, and perhaps to have a look at the chat box and just see if we have any questions that are posted, or open it up to the floor if anyone would like to come off mute and pose any questions for Kateline or indeed I.
Yeah.
I can't see the chat.
No one's brave enough to ask me a question. Maybe I've answered. I'll say one thing while we give everyone a few more seconds. And on just the last picture, beyond this one, I just wanted to bring to life Pastor Evangelist, who I think a really great example of what we were talking about diversifying revenue. And for people that don't know them, it's an online service. They do a subscription service. You can send a gift, or you can get fresh pasta, fresh sauces, and make it at home. They also do cooking classes in person, great for hen-dos, team get-togethers. They're also in Harrods, both as a sort of street food setup in their dining hall, but also incredibly small footprint deli counter where you can go and buy their cold products, but also they will heat them up for you there and then. And it is literally the space of this screen that has an induction hob with the pan on and microwave to heat up the sauces. So in terms of their equipment solutions to diversify their revenue streams to target as many customers as possible, it's a really good example of how that diversity can work. And just two more things I wanted to say, talking about those day parts, talking about coffee and making coffee right. So when you're talking, that's a great revenue stream for clients. So bringing in really easy to use and instinctively used coffee machines, as well as bakery, and anything that in-house people can talk about it being house-made, homemade, whether that be preserved, fermented, or home-baked items. Equipment can really help there diversify the offer from operators. My final tips.
Thank you, Kateline. So I can't see the chat box, anyone, but Thanks so much for joining us, Kateline, and for sharing your insights. I know it's really tricky. You do this as a day job, and I've asked you a potted 30 minutes. Tell us what's going on, and my word, that's challenging. But I'm so grateful you've joined us and shared a snippet of your insights. I'm going to invite the audience. Any more for any more, as I like to say. Any questions, comments, thoughts, feedback? Is it what you see in the market? Or are we completely on another planet? Let's hope that's not the question. But if there are no questions, I'm going to move us onwards.
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat box either.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Adam. So look, everyone, I hope that's useful. My thanks again, Kateline. You were wonderful to speak with you. And I guess the shout out is if anyone wants to get in touch with Egg Soldiers, just Egg Soldiers, just do a quick Google and they'll find your contact details. Is that the best thing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. We're Egg Soldiers, and yeah, or drop you a line, John, and we'll get in contact. And my email address is probably on this chat as well. So yeah, any more detail? It's quite a broad snapshot you've just got, but we're happy to help and happy to answer any questions.
And that's what you do. You drill into these things then and look at all sorts of trends in much more detail. Kateline, thanks so much. I'm going to spend the last 10 minutes, if I may, just talking about a few other things. And Kateline, if you can stay with us, actually, there's a couple of trends from elsewhere that you might have a comment on. First up here, I said at the start that we would talk about the FEA's Industry Insights platform. And it's really a bit of a shout out that the FEA does have a service available. And indeed, it's access to this market modeling platform, as we call it, which allows those users who tap into it to look at the size of the installed commercial kitchen market. And once you've got access, you can go in, you can drill down by the four main categories, and there they are in front of you: cooking and warming, refrigeration, warewashing, and ventilation. And then you can search the UK both regionally and by site type to see, well, actually, full service restaurants in London and the Southeast. Let's have a look at how many warewashing machines have they got, and where might the opportunities be, and start to track how has that changed over the last few months. So it's quite an interesting tool, and we've got a number of members that already use it. The database uses real data provided from both FEA members and this Catalyst database, which is an industry standard across hospitality. So it's really valuable. So that's my shout out, if you like. That's my sales pitch. And if you're interested, there's a link to it on the FEA website. But this afternoon wasn't really about trying to show you or sell you something. I just thought it would be useful to have a look at some of the insights. And this is from the report in June of this year. So this report, I get this every 6 months. So it's a bit out of date. But in June this year, this was telling me the number of machine count across all four of those categories equates to just under 17 million pieces of kit in the UK market. And it's up, driven by quick service, which, Kateline, would probably resonate with what you've said there about the growth of, you call them the grassroots, but maybe some of those being in certainly in quick service restaurants.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think machinery and equipment is the key for operators to be investing in now to be established for the next few years and for the future. So they're doing what they can to set themselves up for survival.
Yeah, absolutely. Surprising to me, refrigeration machines accounting for 60% of the total, but a lot of that coming from retail. And where are we? A little bit further down, that point that we talked about right at the bottom, catering within the workplace continuing to decline. Hybrid working patterns now being much more the norm. And therefore, particularly when I wander around London on a Thursday, Friday evening and see how quiet it is, I guess that resonates with me that certainly the city centres are struggling for the commuter customer that they would have had in the past. This is the sort of data that service provides. I'm not going to go through all the numbers here because there's a lot of detail on this, but it does show you that in terms of machines by sector, most of them on the left are going to retail. Quick service is close behind, then pubs and clubs, all the way down to over on the right, public sector, much smaller than I'd expected, 135,500 bits of kit in the public sector. Travel is bigger than that, and right down at the bottom over on the right, I think we've got venues. So that gives us a shape of it. And if we want to think about, well, by category, again, there's some data here around those refrigeration machines that are in retail. The majority of retail are in is dominated by the refrigeration kit that they've got, whereas you'll see more balance in places like quick serve, pubs and clubs and full service restaurants, which I guess is what we would expect, and a lot more balance than in education. So for me, a few interesting bits of data there. But then the bit I'm really interested in, and bear in mind, this is data back in June, so it does come with that caveat. But there it was talking about the cost of living crisis continuing to be a concern when you think about the outlook for the second half of the year, beginning to have some adverse effects, continuing throughout 23, mortgage rates increasing. Feels like they're going the other direction very slowly at the moment, but they might have reached a peak, and seeing that come down. And further down there, as it says, the return of travel and tourism, particularly from overseas due to attractive exchange rates. So that's driving some of the behaviours, Kateline, that you've talked about there, and some of the opportunities in operator land. And the last bit, this one I wanted to share with you, Kateline, is around our analysis there of the ones to watch. And we were saying there's going to be growth in the estate of some of the established brands, and there they are on the left. Those are the ones that we were calling out. There's going to be some international brands entering the UK market in the middle there. Carl's Jr. I noticed actually all four of them are American based. So premium California burger brand, Popeyes, Black Tap, and Wendy's. And it feels like there's a bit of, can I put shorthand and say the Americans are coming? Do you see that, Kateline, in some of your insights?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see it with UK brands expanding equally. So there's a bit of a cultural transatlantic and into Europe and into the Middle East exchange, certainly. And I'm sure there's investment reasons for that, and anything that's franchised as well is giving people an opportunity to buy into a brand that already has, great setup, great infrastructure, and that can just be adopted, and hopefully benefit from some of the popularity they're seeing in their country of origin. But yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. We'll definitely see more of it.
Which I love burgers, so I'm very comfortable with that. But I guess with that, on a more serious note, therefore there's opportunities. Those on the webinar, look, there's growth, and pleasing for me to hear. Whilst the narrative sometimes in the British press is hospitality is on its backside and it's really struggling and things are very difficult, actually you've talked a lot about the growth and opportunities that are coming with it. And okay, there's diversification, there's innovation coming with it, but growth even from the large operators all the way to we call them the grassroots. And over on the right there, you can see some of the emerging brands that we picked up on as well. Fantastic. Well, look, thanks very much. That's a bit, everyone, of industry insights. I wonder if we've got Andy on the call, Andy Threlful. I'm going to invite Andy just for a few minutes to say a bit about our product group forums. Andy, if you're there.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Thanks,
welcome all. Thank you for that, Kateline, as well. It's tea time can't come soon enough. Looking at all that food, I'm feeling hungry already. But the FEA has quite a lot of members from a broad range of attributes with equipment that they sell, from ware-washing to refrigeration to cookers, even small tablewares. So we have to keep all our members updated. We have around about 15 product group forums. If you can pull the next slide up, John, please. This is off our website. We have specialists which all our members can sign up to and get involved, which support the 3 I principles of the FEA, which stand for the information that we share through all our members, we can actively gain involvement from all our members so they can put forward any concerns they've got in the industry, so that we can establish across board any issues that members might have. Then we can hopefully influence government where any changes might be. So there's quite a few product groups that people can get involved with to use their areas of expertise, where they can feed in to the masses, if you will, and cooperate with each other and collate any concerns that they've got in relevant areas. We also use these product group forums to take care of any stakeholder feedback or stakeholder sessions where there's regulatory changes pointing to our industry. If you go to the next slide, please, John. We've got quite a lot of work gone on over the past year, particularly in the refrigeration product group forum, because there's a lot of legislatory changes due regarding the F-gas, which concerns refrigerant gases that they use in refrigerators, the PFAS, which is covered under REACH, and the Eco Design Directive, and also the ETL criteria for energy efficient products, which is unique to the UK. So we keep all the refrigeration forum involved, and they can actually get involved in any legislation that's happening, any feedback that we've got to feed in there. The ETL criteria also applies to the professional food service equipment that came in at the start of this year and opened up to the warewashing group. So I was heavily involved with the team to look at all the ETL test criteria, which results in a new hygiene standard for commercial dishwashers. So there's two categories in there for under-counter dishwashers and pass-through dishwashers. Likewise, in the cooking and warming, there's criteria for the ETL scheme for convection ovens and combi ovens. There's going to be some work ongoing with hobs and grills, which have been taking part in. We're just waiting for the researchers to come back with information relating to that. So there's quite a lot going on in those particular fields. We've got the technical liaison, where we keep everybody informed with any BSI documents and regulatory changes. The food waste and fog, which is fats, oils and grease, which have had quite a lot of presence recently with the Environmental Act, and the consistent collections has come to our fruition now. So there's quite a lot of work going on in that area as well. And it's where we can engage with members to plan the correct course of action and publish documentation where it helps. Where last year we published the Fog Super Guide, which gives operators a really good way of working out how they can handle food waste, fats, oils and grease management to prevent fats, oils and greases going down the sewers. And last but not least, we're heavily involved with service providers, and we're involved with technical training and updates to ensure that any technician is working to the top of their criteria and conform with any legislatory requirements. So there's quite a lot going on in all the product group forums. That's a brief overview in the limited time that we've got. But if anyone wants any more information, they come back to us. We can quite happily let anybody know what we do in these product groups. And if anyone who's a member who wants to get involved, I'd encourage anybody to get involved in the area that their expertise lies. Okay, John, that's
Super.
That's a big overview. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Andy. Look, appreciate that. So we've talked, haven't we, about thanks again to Kateline, ex-soldiers, about industry outlook and the operator's viewpoint. We've talked about industry insights. We've talked there about the product group forum. So if you want to know more insights about what's happening in a certain sector, as Andy says, we've got groups of people that are looking at all the main sectors. So please do reach out for us. The final thing for me to do is share a little bit of coming soon, really, as it says on the slide in front of us. We've got a few things coming up, that a few important dates I wanted to share with you. We've got the Certified Food Service Professional, CFSP. The next training course for that takes place in under a month's time, 7th and 8th of December. My thanks to the people at SMEG who will be hosting us at their offices in Abingdon, Oxfordshire. It's getting quite late to book on that. So if you're not yet booked on it, probably on the brink, because you've got to do some pre-work before you turn up at that workshop. But if you're interested in it, go ahead and book. There's the link for it. The FEA Autumn Webinar Series continues. Next month, we've got HRC session, where I'll be joined by my colleagues at the Hotel, Restaurant and Catering Show, talking about 2024, what's new in the show, maximising the opportunity. That's quite an exciting session coming up on Wednesday, the 13th of December, and there's a link to booking. Further down then, looking into January 24, yep, we're already very close to 2024. We've got the Combi Oven Service Engineer Training Day taking place at Partstown in the Midlands, and a booking link for that as well. And then finally, I'll signpost the Professional Food Service course. So this is the 3-hour intense trainings course delivered online. That takes place on the morning of Tuesday, the 20th of February, and there's a booking link there. So we will circulate the slides afterwards, so you'll be able to see all of these links and click through as you need to. I'm having a quick look at the chat box to see if there's anything else, and thanks very much for your comments. Any more comments from anyone on the call, really, just as we approach the hour mark? We're just about within time. Questions, comments? And if not, all remains for me really is to say, well, thank you to everyone for coming along. Most of all for Kateline for coming along and sharing your insights and your expertise, Kateline. I really appreciate that this afternoon. Lovely to have a chat with you, even though I've bowled a few awkward and difficult questions to you. Really appreciate you've handled them with aplomb. And to everyone else, thanks very much for taking the time out of your diary to come and join us. Please do come to the next in the webinar series on the 13th of December. Thanks. Take care. Have a good remainder of the day.
Thanks.